The political Daodejing. This is a complex matter, and it's not as though the Daodejing is a elaborate work of political theory that gives a whole series of arguments or something like that. You know, it's not Aristotle's Politics. It's not even Confucius's Analects. So, you know, the Tao Te Ching is cryptic, and the Tao Te Ching's political observations are also cryptic, um, but they're central too. And I do think like one of the ways that the Tao Te Ching is cast is, and maybe this has something to do with later interpretations and various translations as well, is the expectations of later commentators perhaps is cast as advice for rulers, which is an extremely common point of view in classical Chinese philosophy, actually. Many of the central figures of Confucianism, Mengzi, for example, Xunzi, basically appear to be advising rulers, or even kind of trying out. So a duke might hire them, for example, to advise on the state, which is exactly the kind of thing that Confucian scholars would like to be called upon to do. Okay. So I mean, even sort of the embroilment of Daoism in the state at all is it's a little surprising that Lao Tzu is this engaged in these questions, rather than just maybe individual contemplative development or something like that, free and easy wandering. Like I'm advising the sage to go and wander freely. That's Shuangzi really, but okay, so that's pretty far from like what kind of government is best. But there are observations on what kind of government is best. You may recall that I talked about this in a previous lecture, but Alan Watts in Tao, the Watercourse Way, says that maybe Lao Tzu is an anarchist a la Kropotkin. He keeps saying Kropotkin. Well, I don't know. And probably not. I mean, that's anachronistic. And actually, many of the observations on politics presuppose that they're in the Tao Te Ching presuppose that there is a ruler. So I think reading. I mean, I'm an anarchist, and I would like to read it as an anarchist text. I often do read it as an anarchist text, actually. But what I am comfortable like saying, trying to study my way through the translations. I'm just going to go through some Mitchell translations here. Invite you to compare, Starr or other translations. One thing I'm comfortable asserting, it's an anti-authoritarian political orientation. On the other hand, this is not completely apart from Confucianism either, and maybe I should be doing a lecture on comparison between the two. But it's okay. I mean, I'll read passages, but I think it's even more than Confucianism, and certainly more than other competitors. We don't know if Lao Tzu was writing in any awareness of these developments, but maybe previous developments along the same lines. Much more active, statist, or even just straight up oppressive, tyrannical ruling strategy. We're actually in an empire late in the Zhou dynasty, which has disintegrated into a probably, depending on the date of the text, has disintegrated into a set of warring principalities. And so the government, the federal government, is amazingly non-present. But in some ways, both Confucius and Lao Tzu think that's good. At least in the sense that really what you want from an emperor is not a lot. Not a lot of active administration of anything, maybe for somewhat different reasons, according to Confucius and according to Lao Tzu. Okay, so I think it's the main political oomph of the Daodejing comes in the 50s and 60s. So later in the sequence of verses, it kind of seems to develop in that direction, or even kind of culminate with what is on and off cast as advice to rulers. Uh, you could have anti-authoritarian advice to rulers, right? Like just don't oppress your people or whatever, and that is the advice to rulers. There's some advice for the people too in relation to the rulers in Lao Tzu. So he's not just some kind of otherworldly sage talking about the way opposites are interdependent in the universe, in the cosmos. He's also, I mean, there are many passages where he indicates that this is a cosmological picture, but also a picture of human development or real self-realization in certain ways. But then also that it provides some kind of political guidance, vague and cryptic though it may be. And we'll see somewhat more elaborately developed, at least kind of on in a story form, many of these thoughts in Shuangzi. And I should also say that Taoism did not start an anarchist or anti-authoritarian movement in China. And maybe it had its moments though, actually, including some of the Chan influences. But again, later approaches kind of, you give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and then you go and Taoist contemplate on your own time after work. In other words, like, again, a Confucian political philosophy and a Taoist kind of personal spirituality. But I do think like it's really, especially in contrast to other forms of Shunzi's Confucianism, Moism, legalism of Han Fei, and many others, okay? In contrast to this, it's hard not to hear this as directly anti-authoritarian. I mean, I think we know enough to feel like it would have been heard that way, and actually was heard that way, according to some of the people in these other tendencies. All right, so here's, I'm going to read like a series of chapters. Again, Mitchell's translation. I have an old hardback from the from early 90s maybe. The 57. If you want to be a great leader, advice to rulers, okay? Now, you might consult the translation on that line too. You must learn to follow the Tao. Stop trying to control. Let go of fixed plans and concepts. And the world will govern itself. That's the world's most perverse advice to a ruler. It's not the kind of thing you run into in the mirror of princes literature in medieval Europe, for example. Well, I don't know. Maybe there are moments like this. Let go of fixed plans and concepts, and the world will govern itself. It's not exactly technocracy, is it? What we need is a coherent national plan. Okay. The more prohibitions you have, and now this calls into play, the whole structure that we've discussed of the various central concepts of Taoism, including yin-yang interdependence of opposites. The more prohibitions you have, the less virtuous people will be. Think about that one for a minute. Ralph Waldo Emerson said the same. The more weapons you have, the less secure people will be. The more subsidies you have, the less self-reliant people will be. Speaking of Emerson. And again, you might want to look at the translation of that. But the more subsidies you have, the less self-reliant people will be. Therefore, the master says, I let go of the law and people become honest. The master says, I let go of the law, and people become honest. I let go of economics. It's, what's being translated economics there? And people become prosperous. I let go of religion, and people become serene. I let go of all desire for the common good, and the good becomes common as grass. I don't know how good like practical advice this is, this interdependence of opposites, like sort of do the opposite of what you're trying to affect. Is that what he's advising? I'm not sure. How about 58? If a country is governed with tolerance, the people are comfortable and honest. If a country is governed with repression, the people are depressed and crafty. When the will to power is in charge, the higher the ideals, the lower the results. Try to make people happy and you lay the groundwork for misery. Try to make people happy and you lay the groundwork for misery. Try to make people moral and you lay the groundwork for vice. Now, I'm going to say that has a certain bite in reality. Does it not? Try to make people moral and you lay the groundwork for vice. Oh, I don't know. Let's. How about prohibition? What do you think about that one? Let's constitutionally require morality, and then vice explodes. This shit does happen, right? The war on drugs. The war on drugs. Let's make the people more moral. Like we got a drug problem, all right? Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to incarcerate millions. And actually, we're not even going to solve the problem. We're going to make it worse, right? We're going to force the society to be what we think it should be. And that's what's made this sucker a disaster. Okay, that's the, he's got a point. Thus, the master is content to serve as an example and does not impose her will. She is pointed, but doesn't pierce, straightforward, but supple, radiant, but easy on the eyes. Again, I'm tempted to just peel a number of translations, but that would take us a little bit of field. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with translations, but these are a little iffy, I think, Mitchell and this batch, but 59. For governing a country well, there's nothing better than moderation. The mark of a moderate man is freedom from his own ideas. Tolerant like the sky, all-pervading like sunlight, firm like a mountain, supple like a tree in the wind, he has no destination in view. No telos. No goal, no purpose. Is a politics without purpose possible? And makes use of anything life happens to bring his way. Just like sit there and spontaneously respond to events. Here's a famous one, and actually I do quite like Mitchell's translation here. 60. And this is about as close you get to just straight political observation in the Daodejing. 60. Governing a large country is like frying a small fish. You spoil it with too much poking. The world is too much governed. Who said that? Center your country in the Tao and evil will have no power. Not that it isn't there, but you'll be able to step out of its way. Give evil nothing to oppose, and it will disappear by itself. How far are we going to take this interdependence of opposites thing? Don't oppose evil? What am I supposed to do? Welcome evil? Is that the way to make it disappear? I'm not sure. I mean, just the actual practical upshot of any of these policies or any of these cryptic observations are up for grabs, of course. 61 is kind of famous as a political passage in the Daodejing. When a country obtains great power, it becomes like the sea. All streams run downward into it. The more powerful it grows, the greater its need for humility. A great nation is like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Having admitted it, he corrects it. He considers those that point out his faults his most benevolent teachers. He thinks of the enemy as the shadow he himself casts. There's some advice for rulers. Rigorous self-reflection. I don't know if you've seen our rulers. Good luck with that one, man. If a nation is centered in the Tao, if it nourishes its own people and doesn't meddle in the affairs of others, it will be a light to all the nations of the world. Okay. And maybe finally, I guess this turned out to be a pretty quick one. I mean, I just like to say, there will be more explicit passages in the Shuangzi. In particular, there's one where the Duke sends a messenger to Shuangzi and says, who's sitting by the river fishing, and says, like, I'd like to trouble you, Shuangzi, the great sage, Taoist sage, with the administration of my realm. Come take over. The fantasy of every student of Confucius. Get that call. Like, we'd like you to administer our realm on Confucian principles. And Shuangzi says, no, I'm just going to sit here with my butt in the mud. Literally, that's what he says. I'm going to sit here with my butt in the mud. Away with you. Okay. And then the observations in context, are like, I don't think what you're doing is helping, actually. You think you're going to make stuff better. Now, first of all, you're probably tempting me to the ego trip of all times. I'm going to administer your realm. Well, I have a feeling that if I tried to impose Daoism, for example, whatever that means, I would just lead to the equal and opposite reaction or whatever. No, I'm not going to do that. I don't feel like I have the right to do it to other people. I respect other people too much to govern them. Okay, so that does sound pretty anarchist, man. All right. Also, what sounds anarchist is like, I'm refusing to say what this thing should look like. Let people go and see what happens. He says, literally, I think I just read that. Let people go and see what happens. All right, so I'm refusing to design, even to tell you about the ideal society, beyond saying that it's what happens when people get let go. That's a very anarchisty thing. But I'm just not attributing straightforward anti-statism to this. I mean, we have to think about what state means in ancient China, as opposed to what it meant in, modern Europe or whatever. But anyway, so how about 75? When taxes are too high, people go hungry. When the government is too intrusive, people lose their spirit. Act for the people's benefit. Trust them. Leave them alone. Okay, so now we sort of sound like we're going kind of Ron Paul libertarian or something. When taxes are too high, people go hungry. Now, you may think that's just obviously false, but it's obviously true. Okay, so if we come and take 20% of your crops right now, you might starve, right? Happens every day in China, for example. So, leave people with what they have, I guess. When the government is too intrusive, people lose their spirit. They become dependent. They get broken. But anyway, so that's interesting. But on the other hand, again, if I or even Stephen Mitchell is looking at that going like, oh, that sounds like classical liberalism a little bit. That sounds like Ron Paul or something. Libertarianism. Don't tax too much. Although that's I got to say that that's a very common advice for rulers. If I were advising rulers, I'd be like, "Don't tax me too hard, bro." But anyway, if I'm reading, Ron Paul into that passage, okay, surely I'm either appropriating it or bringing a conceptuality from here and imposing it on that. So I apologize for that before I do it. Kind of like it does seem like you don't want too much of an activist government, and you definitely don't want a government that dominates the economy, for instance. Well, to what extent that's Mitchell and to what extent it's Lao Tzu. It's definitely partly Lao Tzu at a minimum. In fact, Lao Tzu might get a little more pointed than Mitchell represents him as being at certain points. But again, I might want to read it that way. All right, so let's be alert for political themes and the ways these get negotiated in the Shuangzi, and then also the way maybe in later Daoism kind of pulls back on to some extent, on the apparently radical political implications of the Daodejing specifically. See you Tuesday.